How do people do this? I'm not unsure. I guess we can say like this is the first podcast, hopefully of many, but the launch of Advise Her, which I wanted to create in order to get more women in the workforce, give the girlies a leg up in the interviewing process, give more color around different industries that everyone can really be a part of. All right, and Miss Taylor, I'll hand it off to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on the first episode. How fun. But yeah, me and Phoebe know each other from our first job out of college. I also studied finance, did not go to Fordham, but I grew up with a mom who was a nurse and a dad who was in construction, which is very common, another common industry in the New York area. Finance was kind of easy to me as far as majors go, so I just picked it. Again, being close to New York, and then was kind of introduced to the world of business, and it's very, very wide and vast. And so there's so many different things you can do. And now I work for a tech company, so kind of made a pivot out of finance. And now I'm almost 10 years, like Phoebe, into a career in tech sales. I cover enterprise companies. What that means is just larger scale companies, sometimes Fortune 100 companies, Fortune 500 companies, things like that.
I would say just from working with you, we'll dive into the specifics, but back when we worked at Thomson Reuters for a few years, you were just like a different type of salesperson in a sense. Like you just like you're very analytical, and you like to really understand the products you were selling. Like you wanted to go deep in on the product and stuff like that, as opposed to me, where back then I was just like, I don't know. I couldn't understand half the stuff we were selling. I guess probably not great. Okay, I would say basis for the questions is just for everyone to know as well, but we want to get an understanding of like who you are as a person to say, okay, like does your personality type align to what you're doing, or like how how does your personality type help what you're doing now, and make you successful? But then let's start from the beginning to see, okay, what kind of kid were you, and then what did you do throughout high school, and then how did you even know you wanted to go into sales? Did you know what your background was, everything like that. So growing up as a kid, as you mentioned, in New Jersey, classic Jersey girls, did you like have jobs growing up, or how many siblings did you have? And then I know you mentioned your parents both worked as well, but just like give us an understanding of kind of what your childhood looked like.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think a really big part of my early childhood into like my teenage years was gymnastics. So I think you'll often hear if you're talking to people in sales, a lot of times you'll either see athletes in sales or, see commonalities between an athlete's personality in sales. It's oftentimes an avenue that people, push former athletes down. Not to say that you can't do sales if were not an athlete. I know very successful salespeople that are, not athletes, but I think that
I
was a
know
really,
one really successful one that was a hardcore athlete.
yes, and we also do know one very, very hardcore athlete. So you get all ends of the spectrum. And I'm sure that at some point she'll get to share her story on here as well. But yeah, I mean, I started working, I guess you would say, when I was like 11. I always enjoyed working. Obviously, 11 legally is not an age to work, but I babysat from a very young age. I don't know who was trusting me with their kids at 11 years old, but I was good at it, and I guess I was responsible. And so I think that taught, work ethic pretty early on. And then in high school, I remember, funny enough, that was during the rise of like the beauty guru YouTuber era, definitely showing my millennial. And I spent a lot of time just watching YouTube videos and stuff. So I wrote into a local boutique store, beauty supply store, and said, hey, I know that you're looking for someone with more experience. I'm 16, but I have a lot of knowledge in this space from, being online. And they gave me the job. So that was my first like two employee job that I
That's when
had.
the government was like, here's Taylor Ryan.
Yeah. Finally stepped onto the scene and did that when I was back from college as well, did that every break that I had. So I just enjoyed making money, to be honest with you. I was decent in school, but I wouldn't say that I am someone who ever has any interest in going back to school. I definitely like don't love studying. It's just I like working. I'm the oldest of three kids, so I think that, just being the oldest, having to kind of pave the way for whatever my parents' expectations were, there was definitely pressure to like be successful. And so I think I found success in just working,
Yeah.
and it felt good to make money. Also did work all through college as well. So once I kind of got through that, I was like, I think that I'm ready to actually have a job. And that's a big transition we could talk about. But
Yeah.
yeah.
True. So let's say going from high school to college, what did you study in college and how did you know, like, did you pick your major straight out of high school or did you like switch majors in college or anything like that?
Yeah, so I actually was like dead set on being a doctor from when I was a kid. I really, really wanted to be a doctor.
I like forgot about this.
Yeah, so I went to the University of Delaware, and there's some great programs there. I have a friend, an old friend from growing up, that started with me on a pre-med track, and now he is a successful doctor. But unfortunately, I think, the size of the classes, it's better that I was weeded out early. Um, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a huge academic. And so those classes are really hard. Props to anyone that can get through them. And so I very quickly had to decide, what major do I want to choose? Um, and given, the advice from my parents, I'm first generation to go to college in my immediate family. And so, the advice that they had for me was nurse or business. We tried the medical route, it didn't work. So I applied to our business school to change my major, and I started as marketing. And, just you declare in college, you declare majors early and you can change them, or at least at the time, that's how it was. I don't know, 10 years later how different college curriculums are, but I was always really good at math. It just came to me. And again, growing up in the New York area, and then, Delaware as a school has a lot of good relationships with, different investment banks, the big four accounting firms. So I was just around a lot of people that were going into more of accounting or finance routes. And so I chose finance. And that's ultimately what I graduated with. So very roundabout. And I feel like 18 is really young to choose what you want to do. So,
Yeah, so
like a
that's why
general
I think
business
it's
route.
like it's just such a factor of your environment. Like
Yeah.
you mentioned your parents and like my dad was in or is in finance technically, but like that was kind of the only thing I knew. And I was like, okay, well, we're close to New York City. The East Coast is very finance focused, but yeah, it's interesting. So did UDEL have programs or mentorship, like networking sessions, anything like that to help you understand internships, to get you in touch with the right people to get those set up to figure out what you might want to do?
Yeah, I would say that Delaware had, a pretty good alumni program. So through the
Hmm.
business school, I did a mentorship program where I got connected with a mentor who, he helped guide me in terms of like applying for different internships, and then also just give me a look into what his life as an executive was like. And then I did have an internship the summer before my senior year at Citibank. And I very quickly was like, the traditional finance route is not for me. So I actually kind of got lucky. I had this one adjunct professor, which to me was really cool because an adjunct professor is like they're moonlighting as a professor. They're doing it in their fun time. And this professor owned like five different businesses. So it was really cool to get his like real life perspective on how what we're learning actually applies to businesses. And so I think in school that also helped me just kind of understand like maybe going and working in a more traditional finance or like corporate route wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. And I kind of explored, all of the different types of businesses, small, big, like traditional, corporate, like there are just so many different avenues. And so that was a good opportunity in college to get a good look at, what options there are out there. Because business
Yeah,
is a general term. There's so much that
true.
falls under that umbrella.
Business, we're in business. So was Citibank in between like your junior year of summer into senior year?
Mhm.
Okay. And so when you got back to your senior year and you were like, okay, that wasn't for me, what kind of steps did you take to be like, okay, I know I want to do something different, but I'm not sure what's out there? Was it mostly like the professor you were mentioning, or was there anything else?
Growing up in the New York area, I think a lot of people come here and they stay here, and you have generations of families that, you know, pick an industry and work in that industry and like are successful, and that's how it works, and pass down the work. And I was very quickly realizing that I just didn't want to follow that route. I knew that I wanted to try and live somewhere with um a different vibe, a different type of person, and maybe like a different type of work environment. So, I said, let me make my life really hard and moved all the way to the other side of the country. And so I think for me, the location was kind of what first prompted, okay, I want to go out there. And the reason for that was I was really interested in tech and startups, in just being around, like being in Silicon Valley was really cool to me. And so, Delaware as a school doesn't really have a ton, or at least at the time, it didn't really have a ton of connections to tech companies, Silicon Valley. But at the same time, I was also a finance major. It's not like I was studying computer science and could go and be a software engineer.
Yeah.
And so I applied to many different jobs, a lot of them through our career portal. I know that I like to talk to people. Like, I think that I tend to like build really good relationships,
Depends on the
and
day.
depends on the day. But I think that you need a lot of soft skills to be in sales, not necessarily hard skills,
Yeah.
as a general consensus. But I kind of fell into sales
Yeah.
by accident.
When you say like you like the soft skills part, right? So when do you think you realized this? Because like knowing you, so knowing you like historically, like obviously we're friends historically, many years here. If I met you today, I'd be like, oh, she can easily go up to a person. She has the confidence to introduce herself, hold a conversation. Some people shy away from that or like don't naturally have that type of a skill. So was there ever a point where you're like, oh, I'm good at this. This is something I can do throughout college? Or was that something like later on into your career that you were like, oh, actually, these align. I just happen to have that characteristic?
Yeah, I mean, so in college, I worked throughout college. I managed some of the buildings on campus. So kind of had to have like a management role in that sense, to manage the facilities. And then in my sorority, I was VP of philanthropy. So very much like having to talk to people. We had 5 different philanthropies. So like just keeping relationships up. Also being organized. Like
Yeah.
I think that that also probably falls into soft skills. But I think in college, I started to realize that, like I enjoyed the energy that I would get from like talking to people.
Yeah.
Like I genuinely felt like energized when I had a good interaction with someone. Problem solving is also a huge part of sales. And so I think like being a math brain, that also I think lends itself well to that problem solving aspect. So I
Yeah.
think that it was a little bit in college, but then obviously you get into the workforce and it's a totally different thing and you're finding yourself in a completely different situation. So you kind of have to build up completely new confidence, especially your first job out of college. Maybe you're working with people that have way, way more experience, and that can be really intimidating. And so I think that's when the hard work, like the work ethic kicks in, to
Mhm.
where you want to prove that you are a valuable, like you have knowledge and you have value to add. And that was a whole different type of confidence in my ability to like talk to people
Yeah.
once I was able to realize that like I could work on that value and it's not something that has to naturally come to you.
Awesome. And then, so before we jump into like the first job and where you started outside of college, what was the application process like? Like, I know where you ended up landing because we were together, but like when you were in college, did you just randomly apply on the website, or how many different jobs did you apply for? Like, what was the response rate? Anything that's noteworthy you think that would help others like applying in the same situation?
Yeah, I think that for me, the application process was most successful through my careers portal at Delaware. That was definitely because I think that it can be really discouraging. You throw out applications and you hear nothing back. And so I think that is somewhat of the hardest part. And I probably applied for, over the course of the year, like 200.
Yeah. Would you say all within the same industry though, or like,
All different industries. I was in retail, I was in, like financial services, like
yeah,
hardcore financial services, consulting, all different industries. And because again, I didn't really know what I wanted, but I just
yeah,
knew that I tried to align what I felt like my skills were with the job descriptions, and then I would apply based on that.
yeah.
And I think that if I remember correctly, I only even went through, I only even like heard back from maybe 8 or 9
Mm.
companies. Like the hit rate was really, really low. But from there, I think, I kind of got lucky and I had 4 different companies that I ended up like pursuing the whole interview track with.
Nice.
And then I also had a job offer for my internship the previous summer at City. I knew that it wasn't for me. And so, I had I had 2 jobs that I interviewed for in New York, and then I had 2 on the West Coast. So flew
Mm.
out for those, and ultimately, I think location mattered for me, but I was just being realistic. I think the first job out of college can be the hardest one to lock down,
Oh yeah, yeah,
because you don't have that network quite yet.
yeah.
For me, like relying on the Delaware network to get in a foot in the door was most successful.
Awesome. Well then, go Udell.
Yeah, go Delaware.
What's your mascot, Adele?
Oh, you don't know what our mascot was?
No, what's your what do I know?
The
I
blue
barely
hen.
know Fordham's. The blue hen?
The blue hen. And
That's cute.
you should look it up because it's ridiculous.
Really?
Yeah,
I'll
baby
have
blue.
to put that on a to-do list.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So let's talk about Thomson Reuters, your first job. So I guess we talked through the application process. I mean, I know from experience that interview process was like, I don't, well, actually, so you talked about how you saw like 4 different interview processes through. Thomson Reuters, I know, was kind of like an interesting one,
Mhm.
from my point of view, but talk through like what that process looked like and how they like asked us questions, what we had to, I know we had to come prepared with like a case study, things like that, but if you remember too. I don't even remember like the first. I just remember flying to California, but
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I remember they sent us, and I don't know if they still do this, but they sent us like it was nearly like a personality test. And
yeah.
we had to like basically they were screening for certain qualities that they wanted. And the program that we ended up in was a rotational program, which I think for quite a few different industries is common. They'll do like a 1 year to like maybe year and a half, 2 year program for entry level new hires. And so they wanted to make sure that we were really good cultural fits, I guess. And then I think maybe and then we had video interviews that we had to send in, but they were
Oh
recorded
yeah.
video interviews. So we weren't talking to anyone.
Yeah. And there was
Um,
like wasn't there like a timer on? I
yeah,
remember. Yeah, that was like
there's a
tricky.
timer on it and you couldn't redo it.
Yes.
Yeah. So had to send that in. And then I think, we all got the email, hey, like you're finalists. We're gonna, send you out to on site, like to the office.
Very like The Voice almost.
Yeah. You're going to Hollywood.
American Idol. It's giving.
Yeah. So we all, show up, and it was basically one of those like super days is what they used to call them. And so I assume they wanted to see how we all interacted with each other. And then they placed us in all different kinds of scenarios to see how we problem solved. They would give us different like resources and they wanted to see how we use them to come to a conclusion. So I think that they wanted to get like a behind the scenes look at how we worked as teammates. We did a presentation at the end, which I think was more personal to each of us. And we had to prepare that. I think that we had to prepare that day of. I think,
Oh
uh,
yeah, you're right. They gave us like 20 minutes or something and they
yeah, and we
said,
needed
okay,
a
prepare.
prop and we
Do you
needed,
remember what yours was?
I don't remember what mine was, but I remember what yours was.
Thank you. I remember it too. I also remember saying I was the oldest of 5 kids, which
I also remember that.
technically I'm the second oldest, but the oldest sounds better. So.
Counting.
Yeah, mine with the bagel shop.
Yeah, that was a good one. I don't remember what mine was. If I had to guess, it probably would have been something to do with gymnastics.
Yeah, probably. I think what was the context? It was like tell us why you would. It was basically like close us out. Like
Literally. It was
why
like
are you good for this
close
role?
ups.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So exactly right. So that was a really interesting interview process. And I know for me, and I think we've talked about this, I remember leaving that being like, I want that job.
Yeah, like that was cool.
Yeah.
Like I
I
am exhausted, but
Right. I
it
like
was
good
fun.
vibes in the room. I felt like the way that they thought
Yeah.
everything was very thoughtful, the way that they went through the interview process. And so to me, that really stood out.
Yeah. No, that was 100% the way you put it, where you're like, you left, and I was like, I mean, I gave it my all. Like, I think I did a good job, but also, like, I really hope that works out. Because we even met the people in the San Francisco office at that point in time, and everyone was great, like, who actually worked there.
Mhm.
So we were just like, wow, this would be perfect. Okay, well, fast forward, I think we probably gave it away, but you got that job. And we ended up working together. So I guess like a good understanding is sure we were in a rotationary program and everyone looks at a job description and is, it's 3 paragraphs outlining exactly what you're going to be doing at that point in time. Tell us about the job, let's say like the first 2 years, and then tell us about what surprised you the most. And then, yeah, we'll go from there. But
Yeah. So yeah, I think it started off as, we had 2 months of training at headquarters, and this rotational program was across the US. So there were four of us in San Francisco, I think two in Chicago, two in St. Louis, and then I think 10 in New York. I don't know if and then three, I guess, in Toronto, I think.
oh, yeah, yeah, Toronto.
And yeah, so like we were all in different offices. And once we left headquarters and like went to the different offices, we realized pretty quickly that every office had different needs. And so, there was an 18-month playbook of what we were supposed to be doing. And just because of, the way that staffing and headcount went in our San Francisco office, we kind of had to jump into like a full-time role pretty quickly, managing clients rather than sort of like, you know, sitting on different rotations
Or
that
like
you
shadowing, like really.
shadowing, yeah, like in
Yeah.
a go-to-market organization. So, to be honest with you, like I feel like we all enjoyed actually getting to do real stuff sooner than later.
Yeah.
I know myself, obviously that was not what the plan was, but I think that the biggest thing that surprised me was just like how much you can learn on the job. Like it gives you this sense of confidence once you figure something out. You have to do your own like work and do some studying on the product that you're selling or supporting, or and the customers that you're supporting and the industry, and keep up on things. But I think going from a college scenario where you're like, okay, I have to pass, I have to take this test to pass this class, and it's very linear. I think, building skills that with less intention, the way that things just kind of come to you over time was the most surprising thing to me. It was definitely interesting. I think that, some roles you get thrown into the deep end, and some you have, more training and time, and they kind of ease you in. And I know for myself, in every, opportunity I've had in my career, I definitely prefer to just be thrown into the deep end, obviously with some support, but like that's just the fastest way you learn.
Mhm.
Drinking from a fire hose can be overwhelming, but it can also like be a really good challenge for you. And when you come out the other end, it gives you the sense of confidence that you didn't have beforehand.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think they also looked at us and were like, okay, they're pretty capable human beings. Like they can start emailing people and we won't have to worry. We
Yeah.
won't have an issue in a sense. And I'm only asking this question because I know from what we've talked about before, but like, you know, I don't know if you took, let's say, like sales classes at Delaware, right? And this job was, the title was, okay, rotational program, different things like that. When did it hit you that you're like, wait, I think I'm in sales? Like, what am I doing here? Because, yeah, when I studied in college, I didn't even know sales was a thing.
No.
Meanwhile, now we're in sales and sales is everywhere. But yeah, when did it, or like, talk us through that kind of journey where you're like, wait, what am I doing here?
Yeah. I definitely did not understand what go to market meant. I
Yeah.
am not
Yeah.
kidding you. I'm not kidding. I thought I was pronouncing it like go to. Like I'm the go-to market associate.
Oh no.
Not
Wait,
even
you're
kidding.
so right.
I
That's
thought
so
it was like a
funny.
hyphenated go-to, and I'm the go-to. So that tells you just how much I knew I was getting into. I
Oh,
think that once we started to like have a lot of actual client interactions and we got aligned to different account managers, that's when I talk about pipeline forecasting. Yeah, I think that's obviously when I was like, oh man, this is sales. It also gave me though such a different perspective on sales because I think growing up in my mind, I'm like thinking of, the people at the mall that are trying to sell you something or
yeah.
like car salesmen. So it definitely took longer than it should have for me to realize what I was doing.
I think all of us were just like, wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly. Uh,
And in your first year there, I mean, the San Francisco office was a little bit smaller, but did you have a mentor or how did you network or did you not understand mentorship and networking until you were like 1 or 2 years into your tenure there?
yeah, and I think that's a good question. Like mentorship can be many different things.
Hmm.
You can have a boss that acts as a mentor, even though you're technically reporting to them. You can have a peer that acts as a mentor. You can have informal mentors. You can have formal mentors. I think for me, like, we were so lucky with the people in the office that they wanted to work with us. And just not to mention, like, we were going into the office every day. All of us were.
Yeah.
So it was easier to build relationships and also just overhear what other people are doing and maybe taking interest in that and saying, hey, can I, sit in on a call with you or whatever it may be.
Yeah, like join someone in the conference room almost. Yeah, it is. It's wild thinking back, like 5 days a week, we were there, but it does make it easier to naturally just pick up on things.
Exactly. So I think the easiest way to like build a network is just to be really like present
Hmm.
in whatever role you're in. And, for us, I think we got lucky. It was a little bit easier because people were interested in paying it forward. But I think you'll find that a lot of people are interested in paying it forward. Like
Yeah.
and then I think the one thing that we learned was, and I want to say that as part of the program, they wanted us to find formal mentors, if I remember correctly.
You're right. Yeah. We had like a
They kind of had
buddy.
to put us through that process.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. Like even now in my career, like I have formal and informal mentors. I am a formal and informal mentor to people. And I think that, when you think of women specifically, like there maybe used to be like this attitude that was more, I had to work my way up. Like, I mean, there's a place for women in business, but I think that it's a challenge, like especially if you're in an industry that's male dominated. Um, I think, for most sales teams I've been on, it's male dominated. So I think like mentorship is a really important way to make sure that you are paying it forward.
Hmm.
And I think that most women that I come across want to, they're
Yeah.
like, here's all the hard things that I had to do that I'm going to warn you of. So maybe you can skip some steps rather than the opposite, so
Yeah, we
that's,
actually, there was a lot of good female representation in the office earlier on.
yeah.
And at Thomson Reuters, I'd say kind of overall, or maybe it was just San Francisco, but I think they did a pretty good job of like diversifying in that way. But so how long were you at Thomson Reuters for?
I believe like just under 2 years.
Okay. And talk us through, you were like, okay, I'm looking elsewhere. I'm in San Francisco. I might want to try something different. But how did you know where you wanted to go? How did you start looking? And what did you end up finding?
Yeah, so I think for me, Thomson Reuters was a really big company, and it's natural that once you are a public company that's 50,000 plus employees, like your growth isn't going to be the same as a startup that has a couple hundred employees and is receiving funding left and right. And so I think for me, I felt like I'd always been like a small fish in a big pond. Like I grew up in a fairly large town. I feel like I went to a decent sized school. Like I went to a state school. It was certainly not small. And then Thomson Reuters is a big company. And so half of me was like, I want to try to work, in Silicon Valley. And then the other half of me was like, it would also be great to be a big fish in a small pond. Like that would be a cool experience for me. And then I think also like at the time, one of our friends had also left to pursue like more of a tech like true early stage sales career where you're outbound prospecting and you're actively trying to go and hunt and get new logos. And so hearing her experience, I was like, I want to try this. So it was kind of the perfect storm, and that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to try something new. And I think there was also this attitude of the work life balance at Thomson Reuters was amazing, but we were like these are the years that we should be grinding, and I wouldn't change it. But there was also something to be said for if I'm going to put in all of this work and effort and build these skills, now's the time.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to give it a try.
So, and then you ended up going to Signal FX, but did you just apply to Signal FX? Because I know you had a pretty like you had like a method to it of the startups you were looking at.
Yeah, so I maybe it seemed that way, but
You're like looking back. No, but I remember when you started applying to Signal FX. Now that I'm more in this, or like my clients are all startups, I get it more now. But I remember back then you were, like, oh, they're backed by Andreessen, like they
yeah.
have da da da, da. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. But you knew, you were like,
It's a
no, that
totally
means
different, yeah, exactly. So it's a totally different world. And it took, to be honest, I had been probably applying for like 9 months to different companies before I really figured out like what
mm,
maybe path I wanted to go down. I knew that I liked a fairly technical sale because you can work for a tech company and sell something that's not technical. Like it's
yeah.
probably more common than not. And so I was kind of, back and forth between different types of tech. And I actually got lucky. I had this girl that was in my sorority, and she worked for a really successful tech company through their IPO. And so I saw that process and I was like, hey, like, why did you pick that company? How did you pick that company? Like, you know, let's talk. And so she's actually the one that pointed me to Signal FX to
Um,
apply. And so when I saw it, I was like, oh, great financial backing. This it's a technical product. It seems like the leadership has really good experience. And so I kind of got lucky again. I think now, once you've been in a space long enough, you have a network. Like
yeah.
every job thereafter I've gotten, or even like jobs that I haven't gotten that I've just had conversations about have all been through my network.
Yeah.
But at the time, going from Thomson Reuters to tech, totally different networks.
Tough.
So again, I kind of got lucky. I generally knew what I wanted to do, but it was definitely a
Yeah.
risk, like any
Yeah.
startup is.
I remember back in the day, I interviewed at a few startups before like my job now. And I remember the biggest thing or their biggest question was always, you're coming from such a big company, like how is this going to work? You going from so big to so small? What was your answer to that question back then?
So for me, I actively took sort of a step back and I decided to go and become an SDR. So like sales
Yeah.
development rep. I could have just, if I wanted to, I could have applied and become an AE, but I
Yeah.
wanted to get that hardcore selling experience. So I think that taking that step back, they knew I was slightly overqualified for the role. And so they were a little bit less, in some ways, they were probably like, why would you do this? But they loved my answer about why I wanted to take a step back. So they
Yeah.
cared more about the work ethic. I think, though, the fact that we had such a non traditional experience for what the role was meant to be at Thomson Reuters really helped in answering that question.
Yeah.
We were kind of like thrown to the wolves in ways that I think is the biggest, like the most jarring part of going to a startup. That those questions are meant to like weed people out that maybe wouldn't handle that environment well. So I think
It
that,
weeded me out. I was like, you're right.
to be fair, I think that you probably would have done better than you think, to give yourself credit. But yeah, and then I told the story about like feeling like I was always a small fish in a big pond. And
Yeah.
it was like an active choice. It's not like a I think once they realized that I was actively seeking that out and knew what I was getting
Yeah.
myself into, I think that they appreciated that.
So, okay, so you went to Signal FX. Talk about that first few months even there, because I know it was, as you said, jarring to switch, but like just so different. And then talk us through the all the Signal FX, their journey in general.
Yeah. So this was 2018, I guess. So this was like in the big tech boom and companies were popping off. Like, exits were happening left and right. So it was a really crazy and exciting time to be in tech. The first, I'd say, year was very jarring. It was a lot of hard work. We were also, I had to commute. I wasn't actually like in working in San Francisco, so I had to commute all the way down, the peninsula.
Yeah.
So that in itself, I got really close with my coworkers because I did not have a car and Caltrain was on the other side of the city. So, that honestly was a really good thing. Like I was working with people that were all my age. I got along with them really well. So, and then so we wanted to spend time around each other, but we also like were, our work was like everything. So we were
Yeah.
constantly talking about work, and I think I learned things really, really quickly. I think some of the most jarring parts were just how intense I think leadership can be at these tech
Mm,
companies, especially smaller ones that maybe don't have the like people ops oversight that bigger companies
yeah.
do.
Well, you have to like show growth and show growth so quickly.
Yeah, so it was a definitely like a wild experience, but I found it really energizing. I also found it really stressful. I will not lie. Like there were times where I was like, why am I doing this? But I think that once I started to like actually make commission checks, I was like, whoa, this is cool.
Yeah.
Actually being able to like control your destiny, control your paycheck, see direct results for the work you put in. I think there's a lot of roles where you maybe, your salary static, and so it leaves room for one person to like do the whole group project, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so what I love about sales is that your results are going to be very black and white. They also directly impact your bank account. So I found that really empowering. And I remember, like just thinking back to mentors, one of my best friends now too. At the time, I was an SDR. She was the top AE at the company. I definitely looked up to her, even though we were around the same age and like sort of peers. She really, really inspired me, like, to take control of my, of like what I was doing. And just if I could crush it, I could make money and like have this financial freedom and be able to support myself. I just found it really empowering. And so I think that also changed things for me in terms of how I thought about my job. And then Signal Effects went on a cool journey. We eventually got an office in the city, so that, improved quality of life. I became an AE after 8 months, so got some good cold calling experience. So I saw career growth at Signal Effects, which is really cool. And then we got acquired, which was a really cool experience. I'll never forget the day that we were all sat down in the office because we thought we were having an all hands just as usual. And that's when they announced we're getting acquired. And then I think maybe 10 minutes later, it was announced, on like MSNBC,
Wow.
and there was an official acquisition in play. So we were acquired by Splunk, and that was a cool experience. I got to work as an overlay for a bit. So that means just the product that I'm selling, I would continue to sell alongside whatever complementary product Splunk offered. So there was a rep selling the core Splunk stuff and then me selling Signals Effects stuff, and we would work together on the same accounts.
I know you lived that life for a little bit, but let's talk about where you are now. So at Kong, which is when you first started, much more of a startup, a small employee count, but being at Splunk, I guess, brought you back to that like big fish, small pond thought, where you're like, this, I want to go back to the startup
Mm-hmm.
world. So talk about that process.
Yeah, so another like theme that you'll probably start to see as I like continue to take new roles. I had a mentor who is still a mentor to me to this day and a good friend that went to Kong. I think that the company was between 150, 200 people at the time. And she was going to build out a team. And I said, I would love to work for you. I think that I'm ready to leave the bigger company and go back to another startup and try and have that ride again. Once you go through an exit, and I think that's everyone's dream, like to have
Yeah.
some sort of event like that. Anyone that works at a startup, that's the goal, right? So once I had that, I was like, I want to do it again. You just keep chasing
Yeah.
it. And so it was kind of perfect timing. This would have been COVID time. So this would have been the first role that I onboarded and did fully remote, which was a totally different experience. And
Right. Well, was Kong remote like from the onset?
so I started in January, or I guess February of 2021.
Okay.
So it was deep COVID. Everyone was remote at the
Oh,
time.
so
Before that, Kong had an in-person culture, like they had an office and everything. Now everything's fully remote, but that was also a new experience. And so working for someone that I trusted, that I felt like I already had rapport with, was really important to me because
yeah.
on that's just a totally different animal. And so that's how I ended up at Kong. So kind of like followed the same journey. Big company, want to go back to a small company, get acquired, big company, go back to a small company. And
You
again,
start up
like,
early.
yeah. And I'm just lucky that I've had these women that have either given me guidance or like taken me on. The network is just like, I feel like I always heard that when I was in college. The network's everything. It's always who you know, but
Yeah.
it really is. If people like see that you do good work and they like to work with you, they're going to want to work with you again.
Yeah. And I feel like it just almost that network just takes time too. It's not something you can just construct within your first year of being at a job. I think looking back over the past 10 years, you realize how big your network now is, but it's just because, I've worked at, where have I worked? Two different places, but I know you and those people that you worked with at your first company have moved somewhere else and they know people and it's just like a wide net. But I think it just takes time. It's not something you can just do yourself. But okay, so you've always been in sales. Now you're at Kong. Let's say if someone from college is like applying for jobs and they reach out to you and they see that Kong is hiring, can you give some advice or talk about a specific example of someone that's reached out that's actually caught your attention where you're like, oh, this is a great reach out of someone who's really interested. I'll talk to them because, you know,
Yeah.
they put a lot of thought and value into the message.
Yeah, it's honestly, it doesn't take much. Like what I'd say is skip the niceties and get right to the point.
Yeah.
If you come to me and you say, "Hey, like caught interest in this," or saw we had something in common, or if you say something that feels personal, like it's going to catch my eye, anyone's eye. And I think generally, well, one tip is that if someone wants to apply to Kong, we have a bonus referral program, which most companies do. So one thing that I would say is when I was in college, I was really shy. I was like, I don't want to bother people. Know that people are incentivized to get you hired. So, obviously we're getting lots of messages, but like if you differentiate yourself, people are going to be willing to hear you out. And so what I'd say is, try and make it personal, like try and make it not as least generic as possible to
Yeah.
catch someone's eye. And be persistent, like follow up. I'll open messages and thought that I responded and I didn't, or
Mm,
I'll see a message and mean to respond and forget.
yeah.
That's also, that's that's also something that I had to get used to and was always, didn't want to be a bother to people. Be a bother to people. I
Yeah.
promise you. If it's too much, they will tell you to stop. If they're
Yeah.
not telling you to stop, then you have permission to keep going. That's what I'd say.
Yeah. Oh, there's the sales girl.
Yeah.
If you had, I guess I don't want to like deter anyone from applying to sales, like if they're thinking of like wanting to be an AE or anything along those lines. But if you or to think about like certain personality types or characteristics where you're like, if someone came up to you and was like, I don't really like talking to people. I'm more of a, I just want to sit behind my computer all day. You'd be like, okay, maybe sales isn't for you. But is there something you can think of where you would tell someone like, okay, pick a different industry or line of work because this is what it takes to be in sales and to be successful or something along those lines?
I would say it's a high stress job.
Yeah.
Like with, the control over your income also comes a lot of things that you cannot control in deals. And so it
Yeah.
is stressful. Your highs are really, really high and your lows can be really low. So
True.
if you like have a hard time dealing with that volatility and prefer something that's maybe a bit more stable, I think that would be one thing I'd say is tough. Um, and then yeah, if you don't love talking to people all day, um, probably be really exhausting for you. But if I'm completely honest, I think of myself as an introvert. Like I enjoy talking to people, but I love my alone time. Like I love my days where I don't speak a word. So, I wouldn't say that you need to be like the most extroverted person ever to be successful, but I do think that you have to become comfortable talking to all different types of people. One thing I'd say is the persona that you're selling to will
Mm.
really change your experience as a seller. So, I sell to engineers. They're a totally different type of personality than if I was selling to salespeople, for example, marketing
Yeah,
people, procurement. Um, engineers tend to be really to the point, and that works better for my personality type and how I like to have conversations.
yeah,
So I'd say sales is if you don't know what you want to do, find a product that you like and try and sell it. Even if you don't build a long sales career, I think you will learn a lot about yourself. You'll learn skills that maybe you wouldn't in other roles and really, really quickly. So I think, like, I always encourage people. I'd say those are the two things that if you are like dead set against, a lot of volatility in your job and then, talking all day, those are probably things that I would watch for.
yeah.
The other thing that I guess I didn't think of is you have to have a lot of intrinsic motivation. No one is going to
Mm.
give you deadlines. Like no one is going to, tell you you have to write this email. I need this done this day. I need this, this, this. You need to want to do it.
Yeah,
And you need to be really good at like managing your own schedule and motivating yourself. So I would say that's another thing. That comes with more of a volatile job, but you
yeah.
have to really be a self-starter to be successful.
That's really good advice because I feel like a lot of times people say, okay, as salespeople, you're incentivized by, you have your base and then your bonus. So if you want your bonus, like, you better start selling. But at the same time, there's a lot of time, right? Your bonus is based, well, at least for me, majority of my experience, the bonus has been based on like your yearly or annual growth towards your target. So if you're starting January 1st and you're like, it's fine, I have 12 months to
Yeah.
get to that. It's like, no, 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 you need to start on January 1st. Like, you're already behind and you need to have that intrinsic motivation to be every day try and work towards it. Whereas you can't like put stuff off or just be like, oh, I have, 6 months left or stuff like that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, it's a procrastinator's recipe for disaster.
Yeah, you can dwell. This is a procrastinator's home if you want. So, last question, or two questions in one. So what's the best piece of advice you have gotten from like either a mentor or either just like throughout your experience being in the business world? And then what's one piece of advice you would give to anyone that's entering the business world, whether it be in sales or any industry like that?
This is something that I'm sure other people have heard too, but I never want to be the smartest person in the room. Not that I think that highly of myself, but when you feel like you're plateauing in terms of learning, it's time to
Mhm.
go. Whether that means choose a different team, maybe you need to be under a new manager, like maybe you need to be learning a new product, maybe you need a new company as a whole. I think that's the best piece of advice I've gotten. Like once you feel like you're not learning, um, it's time to make a change. And so I think that's the best piece of advice. My advice to anyone is don't overthink it. Like, just get a job, exhaust all of your options. And this is for people that are maybe wanting to go into business. Like, I'm not going to speak to other professions, but anyone that is, looking to go into sales or like sales adjacent, I'd say like the most important thing you can get is experience and just like, getting your foot in the door. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
perfect. It doesn't have to be the perfect job on the first go. I mentioned how I started in one industry and made my way into a very different one. I think that getting experience is just the most important thing you can do.
Yeah.
Something we talk about in sales, which is going to be a very corporate term, but like analysis paralysis is something we talk about, like overthinking how you're going to message something or like email prospect or whatever. Like just getting the messaging out there, getting the experience, getting your foot in the door, and getting a position under your belt on your resume is more important than it being the perfect job. That
Yeah.
will come. Careers are long.
That's good advice. Especially now because it's like every job is, oh, you need X years of experience. It's like, well, I
Yeah,
need to get experience.
exactly. And that being said, just put yourself out there. Even if you think you're underqualified for the role, like
Yeah.
apply.
Yeah.
What does it hurt?
What's the worst they could say? No?
Exactly.
not answer. That happens to me all the time.
That'll happen regardless. So
Yeah, seriously. All right. Well, thank you, Miss Taylor, so much for being on. Yeah, should be great, but I appreciate you taking the time.
yeah, thank
By the
you.
way, I was just thinking, have you changed your last name officially?
No,
Oh my gosh. Because
I
I was
know I
like, oh, I'm
have
going to
to do
introduce
it.
as Taylor Ryan. And then I'm like, well, is it Taylor?
Every time that I go to do it, we like realize that we have another international trip booked.
Yeah.
Once the trip is ticketed to my name, we can't change my name. So if I show up
Uh,
with documents and domestic, it doesn't really matter as much
yeah.
because I can like kind of get away with it, but internationally, like I'm not messing with that.
Yeah. No, no, no.
So,
Not here for it. Well, Miss
no.
Taylor Ryan Canty,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.